Folks, welcome to a very important show, and I'm going to tell you why it's important. Fentanyl, the F word. Have you heard it? Yeah, it's everywhere. Now, guess what? It's in marijuana. It's in mushrooms. It's looking like candy. My wife, who I just talked to on the phone, is a social worker at a school. There's a 2-year-old who's brain dead right now. 3 days ago, the 2-year-old found a little baggie. It had cocaine and fentanyl in it. The kid's now brain dead. There are stories like this happening every minute of every single day. And as parents, we have got to educate our children. And I'm saying that having lost my eldest child. And that's why I'm here, because I don't want anybody else to lose a child. And being here doing this has helped me recover. But if you don't have a direction and you don't have any way of being positive, it can destroy not just the life of a loved one, but the lives of many people who are associated with that person, because it destroys them. They get depressed. They can't be positive. So my advice to anybody out there who has lost somebody is don't let it destroy you, but go out there and stand on the rooftops and say, we got a problem. We've got a huge problem, and it's called fentanyl, and it's killing young, old, everybody. And I've got 2 experts in the field, probably the number one place in the world who figured out a little bit about the human condition. And I've got with me Angie and Dan. First of all, guys, I want to tell you how much I appreciate what you guys have been doing for the last 26 years. You've been trying to save lives.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And I wish that I'd met you guys before, but this whole show is not about a pity party for me, okay? Because there's 58,000 people that died last year. So do the math. Let's just say 50,000, right? That's 100,000 parents. That's 400,000 grandparents. That's 400,000 people in grief. That doesn't include the friends, family, siblings. So maybe 1 million, 2 million people in America are living in grief because somebody died unnecessarily, people. And that's the point I want to try and make. It's unnecessary. And these 2 individuals know more about it than anybody that I've ever talked to. And please help me understand. You guys are on the ground. You own a rehabilitation center. Yeah. You see it all day long.
Yeah.
What is going on?
It's going from bad to worse, and it's almost like nobody's talking about it. As you were saying, it's interesting when you were talking, my daughter is 23, and she said, Mom, just last year I had 6 friends overdose and die from fentanyl.
Yeah.
At 23 years old.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't have that quantity of friends dying. And it's not like they're hardcore users. It's not like they're, junkies in the street. These are
Right.
kids who think, I'm taking a Molly. I'm just, party drugs, they call them. They don't even realize that what they're taking is laced in the fentanyl, and they're dying.
Well, I mean, we're pointing out a problem here, and folks at home, I'm pointing out the problem. There's a problem, okay? My son's dead. That's a problem. Yeah. But what we want to talk about today is a solution. Dan, what is a solution? Just give me some hope here. And for the people at home, please listen. This man knows what he's talking about. What can we do to stop our kids and grown-ups and all kinds of people dying, Dan?
Well, I think you nailed it on the head. I think we have to start talking about it. We have to educate people. Look, I don't want to come across, we run a treatment center. We don't want to come across as the morality police. Like, we're not going to tell you just say no. We're not going to tell you don't smoke weed because it could be laced with fentanyl or whatever. People are going to make those choices. What we're trying to do is educate you that these drugs may be deadlier than you think. Yeah. Right? People don't realize this. They think they're doing a little bit of cocaine or something like that, or they're smoking a joint. They don't realize it's laced with fentanyl and it's deadly.
Well, Dan, you shared a picture with me before we started shooting that I think, they say a picture says 1,000 words, people. Look at this picture. You see that? You see that on the end of that little piece of carbon? That's enough to kill you, right, Dan?
Yeah, that's a pencil. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? That is a deadly dose of fentanyl. So if you can imagine that can be sprinkled in to any kinds of substances, think of how many people could die, which is why this is happening.
Well, when I was growing up, I mean, heroin was a really bad word. Yeah. Heroin. It was like, right. Ooh, like, you can smoke weed, do speed, do coke, do acid, do mushrooms, but you don't do heroin, right?
Yeah.
Guys, listen to this. This is a young man, Kai. And just listen to this. I'm going to talk about it when we come back.
All of my core friend group throughout high school kind of started dabbling in heroin a little bit. It had quickly turned into, I need to like go and, do whatever it takes to get this drug. I ended up dropping out of college pretty quickly, was not able to maintain a job. I committed to myself, like, I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to take this as far as it can go, and I'm going to build a better life for myself. Don't wait until things get that bad. Don't wait until you start losing people, you start losing friends or anything like that. If you have the opportunity, if you have the chance to stop it now, and to do more with your life and to make something more of your life right now, then do it, because it doesn't lead anywhere. It doesn't lead anywhere good.
Okay, so Kai said, I started off doing heroin. So he's not this guy, right, who just so happened to take a Molly that happened to have fentanyl in it.
Right.
Or he was intentionally using fentanyl, which is an education. I always thought it was just an accident somebody died. So kids are actually using a substance that's 50 times more powerful than heroin, that was developed in the medical industry.
Right.
So they didn't have to pump you full of morphine. You can actually, it started off, they had a fentanyl patch.
Right.
But it was a metered out. They knew what they were dealing with.
Right. And it was for end of life usually. People at the very end of their life, when they were in such pain, they needed something. And that's why it was developed.
That's why it was developed. But now it is flooding across the border from Mexico. And this is a fact, people. I'm not a conspiracy theory guy, right? I believe 9/11 happened. I'm not quite sure about whether man landed on the moon, but I'm not a conspiracy guy, okay?
Right.
But there's a fact. Fentanyl, and some of the people that we've visited with it in the show live in areas close to the border, right? And that's where the biggest problem is. Close to the Mexican border, because the cartels are pushing fentanyl across the border to America.
Right. And then it goes from there to, like you said, Salt Lake City, which is very far from the border, but it spreads out.
I mean, I'd never heard of fentanyl until probably 3 or 4 years ago. Right. But what are some of the things that people can do to save their children's lives, assuming that their kids don't just simply abstain?
Right.
I would say this: education. Here's how it's being used. Here's it being laced in marijuana. Here, this Skittle. That's not a Skittle. That is actually fentanyl.
I've seen
like
that.
Education and statistics, because it isn't the same world that we grew up in. It's very dangerous nowadays because they don't even realize that they're taking it.
Right.
They think they're taking one thing. It ends up being laced in something else.
Well, and I know from experience, right?
Yeah.
If you overdose and you die and you don't have oxygen going to your brain,
Right.
you've got literally between 3 and 5 minutes.
Right.
Well, guess what? The ambulance isn't going to be here in those 3 or 4 minutes.
It was last year. It was spring break. My son is in college. Him and his friends decided to go to Florida for spring break. That's what you do. And a couple of us moms were on a text chain. They're like, "Oh my gosh, did you guys read the headlines? Have you talked to your son today?" And we're like, "Oh my God, what do you mean? My son's in spring break. What happened?" And what happened, and this was not our kids, thank gosh, but a couple of the kids got some cocaine party down there. They did it. They were overdosing. Their friends who were there with them, not partaking in that, see their friends on the ground overdosing. Oh my gosh, let me save my friend's life. Administer CPR. Let me bring them back. Now they've got respirated in their mouth. Now they're overdosing and dying. So they're even trying to help their friends and do the right thing and putting their own lives at risk. They all ended up overdosed at the hospital. A couple of them died. Most of them recovered.
Yeah. Could you imagine trying to give mouth to mouth to save your friend's life and then you OD? Because as we showed, there's so little it takes to OD.
Well, a friend of mine's a police officer, and he went to the scene. A guy passed out. The guy went to the hospital, and the police officer ended up overdosing on fentanyl just by catching on his fingers.
Right.
Let me tell you a really crazy story.
Right.
So a friend of mine, her husband had cancer and he ended up passing away. And the lady who was looking after in hospice, she became very close with this lady. So after her husband passed away and he was taken away, and this is very sad, it was time to clean up the drugs. Okay, so you've got to be very careful with this stuff to get rid of it properly. Okay. So all of a sudden, the nurse was obviously high. She was just high. And my friend, the brother and sister of the deceased said, "Call the police." She said, "No, I'm not calling the police. This is somebody who's helped me, take my husband to his grave." And so anyway, it turned out that she had been wearing rubber gloves for the entire cleanup process. And when she cleaned the instruments, she took the gloves off. That's where she absorbed the fentanyl.
Wow.
So she took her outside and put her in her car for 45 minutes, called her boss and said, your employee is high as a kite. Luckily for her, now she could have lost her license, she could have ended up in jail, everything else, right? Because even she, as a professional who deals with fentanyl every day, didn't realize that just cleaning a pair of scissors that was used to cut the packet.
A lot of times when people are around other people that are overdosing, due to the fact that they themselves are high, they fear for their own lives and security. They don't want to go to jail. They don't want to get in trouble. They will not call for help. They will not call 911 because of their own situation. So it's doubly hard.
Well, let me tell you what, I have a lot of respect for this young lady that we're about to see.
Yeah.
Because she was in exactly that situation. And she's going to tell the story herself. But yeah, she faced that moment.
Right.
Do I call 911 or not? And folks, that's how bad this disease is, because you know that most of us obviously would save somebody's life if we could. But it brings you down to a level where it's almost passive suicide, right? I mean, you've met people who say, you know, we didn't really care if we woke up the next day.
Right.
So you're not even living a life. You may as well almost be dead if you're just in a cycle of abuse where you wake up, you cop, you're happy, and then you're sick. Right? Is that's the cycle? I'm not an expert.
Yeah.
This is just from talking to you guys.
That's
off camera.
exactly right. Yeah, and all you're worried about is your next fix and how to make sure you make it to that point.
Right.
And you'll do anything you have to.
And fentanyl's an opiate, so it's highly addictive, physically and mentally. And then, like you guys are talking about, at first you're chasing the high because it feels good, but then you're chasing just feeling normal.
Right.
You need it just to feel well, and it passes the point of even feeling good anymore.
It's getting really scary out there for, you know, everyone that wants to try new drugs and all of that. I think the majority of like every substance is like laced with fentanyl. And I always see on the news that kids younger than 18 are overdosing and passing away from this. And I've had a personal experience with some friend that I was hanging out with at the time. You know, I wasn't clear on what I was sharing with him, and he took it and he overdosed in my hotel room. I was so afraid to call 911 because I was scared of getting in trouble myself, but I ended up calling 911 and that saved his life. You know, now we have Narcan. I didn't have it on me, but I used to carry it on me everywhere I went for that purpose of somebody finding me. I always let my mom know, it's here if you need to find it. If you find me, unconscious, it's right there. Don't be afraid to use it.
I'm looking at you right now because you're watching this show and I'm telling you, get educated, okay? Because otherwise you get educated when it's too late, right? So make the choice now to get educated. Go on the website or call the number on the screen and get your free book. That's the first step, right?
Yep, that will help. Yeah.
What's the second step? And you guys are professionals. Like, if you've got a kid who, my son wasn't the same. What could I have done? I think at the end of the day, especially reading your book, I was angry with him. Mm-hmm. I was frustrated with him. I did want him to be a different person. And he actually had passed away 2 years prior to him actually really passing away, and they narco-pinned him. And I reached a point where I said, you know what? I'm not going to judge you anymore. I just love you for who you are. And those were the best 2 years I had with him.
Yeah.
But then, I was second-guessing myself, thinking, well, maybe I could have done more. But tell me this, and you guys know better than anybody else. Is it down to the individual who has the problem, right? Or can somebody else convince them to get better?
Both. I would say both. There has to be a level of being willing, and a lot of people reach a pretty bad bottom, and so it makes them more prone to being willing. They're going to lose their family, they're going to go to prison, different things like that. Yeah. But a lot of times it takes an intervention, with professionals, or even just finding the right place and having them talk to the person and say, well, let's lay this out. It's not really harming your life. Let's look at your life. So a lot of times it's just talking to a professional or getting to the right people that can help them understand that what they're doing, although it doesn't seem like it's, the bottom, you hit the bottom, it is still bad enough that you could benefit from help.
Well, and Angie, you shared with me off camera earlier that you had a bout with addiction.
Yeah.
And Dan, you told me off camera too that most of the people that work at your facility have been through addiction.
Absolutely.
So it's like part of the education is I wasn't an addict, so I can't really give you all of that advice. But talk to a recovering addict, right?
Yeah.
And I don't care who you are or where you are in the country, there is help right there. HELP.
Yeah.
Right?
I think the thing is when you talk to somebody who's been down that road before, the judgment and the shame and all that kind of stuff isn't present, because how can I judge you for doing heroin if I had done heroin myself, right?
Right.
So there's that there's that relationship where it's not sort of talking down to somebody.
Yeah.
And then they can sort of drop the BS and get real with each other and have a real honest conversation. And if you can't speak to your parent about this, right? Because look, I'm a parent, and we all have our expectations of what we want our kids to be, and they feel oftentimes that they're not living up to those expectations, and there's that guilt, and there's all these emotions and things like that. So they may not open up the same way as they would open up to a person they barely know, but they do know that this person is dealing with something that they're dealing with now. And so all of a sudden they'll listen.
Well, folks, in this book that Dan wrote, that you can get for free right now, there is some amazing information. And one of the pieces that I want to ask you about, actually, you don't very often get to ask an author about the book. It's like asking an artist, like, why did you paint this picture? It's a great thing. But one of the questions I had to ask, you talk about that your program is not 12-step.
Right. So I never resonated, and I don't think Angie ever resonated with the idea of being powerless. Right. And
Yeah.
that's basically the first step of a 12-step program. And, I'm not saying 12-step hasn't worked for, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people. Right. So we'll acknowledge that. But we were finding that the newer generation, younger people, really would not subscribe to that idea. Not that we were pushing it, but it was something that they didn't like it. They would come in and telling us that, hey, I didn't like that they were making me feel powerless. I didn't like that they were telling me once an addict, always an addict. I didn't like that they told me addiction is a disease and then I have to be, a slave to it for the rest of my life. So we don't believe any of that at Elevate. We're completely the opposite. We believe that you should be empowered to overcome all of your issues, addiction being one of them, and that you should discover for yourself what's meaningful in life and go tackle your purpose and tackle your dreams. Because you know what? When you're happy every day, when you wake up, you don't feel compelled to numb yourself with substances.
I think that's what we need to learn as parents, is exactly the same thing, right? Like, we can't look at our child who's going through a hard time, who may blossom into an amazing individual like you, Angie. I mean, and Dan, you had some issues too,
Sure.
right? And I mean, me to a certain extent, I was involved in drugs. I was actually taking heroin at one point in my life. My dad took me to Florida, and luckily I got away. I got back. My buddy Pindy, he's on the run because he'd stolen money from so many people they want to kill him. And my buddy Nick's in rehab. And I got back. It was just a blessing. I was lucky. But I think that this is the same advice that you should give to a parent, right? Is accept your child for who they are.
Right.
Don't make them try and be something that they're not.
Right. Which is very difficult as a parent, because you want the best for your kid.
I know, but
And
that's
it's
not
hard.
necessarily what the kid. You're just going to isolate that child more, and it's even more likely they're going to abuse.
Right.
Because that's not what they want to hear.
Right.
So we have to just tell our kids that you're beautiful, and that you've got such a huge future. And I guess the take home is this: analyze where your life is going. Right? Is it going in a positive direction? Is drinking a bottle of wine a day going in a positive direction? Is taking fentanyl okay? Right? Because people who take fentanyl obviously think it's okay. Otherwise, they wouldn't take it.
Right.
Is taking fentanyl okay?
Yeah.
I mean, only if you're okay with playing Russian roulette. Like, you never know when that time could be, or that one time is it. You're done.
Yeah. Or how about this? Getting drugs on the street, right? You think you want to just do something that seems harmless, right? Some pot, right? Or some cocaine or something like that you would think, okay, maybe it's bad, but it's not deadly.
Yeah.
Right? Think about that. That could be your death.
Well, and folks, if this is a parent watching without their kid, I think you have to have this conversation with your child. And you see people come, well, you said you were addicted at 11,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So let's just take the blinders off, parents, and realize that this is a new world that we live in. And we've got to tell our children, be super careful. Now, I did hear there was actually a fentanyl test kit
Yes.
that you can actually, and as a parent, obviously you're going to tell your kids, don't do drugs.
Sure.
Like, what was this, Nancy Reagan's thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just say no.
Just say no, right?
Yeah.
That's typical of, of Nancy Reagan. Just say no, because she never had a drug problem.
Sure.
I mean,
She might have meant well, right? She thought if everyone just said no, then the drug problem will be solved. But unfortunately, it's not so easy.
I feel like a lot of parents wait because they're like, oh, my kid, they're too young. I don't want to have this conversation yet. I don't want to put the idea in their head.
Right.
But I think that's a big mistake that parents make, because now they're getting their information from other kids at school
and from the internet, let's face it.
Yes.
right, and who have older siblings who are educating them. So I don't think it's ever too early to start having the conversation. You're not going to plant a seed that says you should do drugs. You're actually going to educate them on why they should never even take that first time, and make that education come from you.
Right.
Because they're not getting it in the school systems. One of my friends whose child also died from fentanyl, she's a principal at a school, and she called me up. She said, hey, do you have information? We need it in the school to educate children on fentanyl.
Right.
There are no resources on that.
Well, there
right
is now. This video here right now
Yes,
needs
that
to be
was
in the
a
schools.
part of
It
why I'm
needs to
doing
be
this.
everywhere.
Yeah.
And this is not a for-profit show. We're not promoting anything. We're just promoting awareness, and we're trying to save lives. Let me tell you the education that my 5 children got when my eldest son died. They got the education that fentanyl kills because their older brother dies, and I can guarantee you that those 5 kids will not be taking drugs.
Yep.
Because they know firsthand. But you don't have to have a sibling or a loved one die to figure this out. And that's what we're trying to say. It's like proactive medicine, right? You go get a CAT scan and figure out that you've got cancer so you don't die. This is the same thing. It's proactive education. The fentanyl test kit, the narco pin, the spray, these are all things that we can do. But I think you're right, Angie. I think the primary thing is education.
Right. And I want to reiterate what Angie said. It's a young age. If you think your 10-year-old little innocent little girl, you don't want to expose her to the dangers of the big bad world. You want her to remain innocent
Right.
just a little while longer. You're doing a disservice. You have to just say, hey, there are people out there that are selling drugs that can kill you, and they don't care about your life. They're willing for you to die so that they can make more money, so that they can buy mansions and grow this big empire. And also, when you start talking to them about that, and you can say things like, and they'll say, "Oh, Daddy, I don't do drugs or anything like that." You could say, "But this may happen, and if it does, or you get exposed to it, I want you to be willing. You can come talk to me about it.
Right.
Even if you do it, you can come tell me about it. I don't want you to feel like you can't talk to me about it." My mom used to have this saying. She used to say, "There's never anything that you do that's so bad you can't tell me. Just always remember that." And I always had a really good relationship with my mom because I was willing to say anything to her, and she would reiterate that to me over and over and over. You can always talk to me about anything. It doesn't matter how bad it is.
And that's the problem with addicts. They're not honest with anybody.
Right.
And these are the signs that parents need to recognize.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is that the addict is not typically telling their parents, not necessarily because they're afraid to get caught, but there is some of that, but also they don't want to let their parents down.
Right.
They don't want to make their parents feel ashamed. They don't want their parents to feel like they did something wrong.
Doesn't that just drive them closer and closer into substance abuse?
Of course it does.
It's a cycle, right?
Right. But if if you can understand that your kid, who you're mad at and you're frustrated with because they're lying to you and they're lying to you, if you realize they may be lying to you to protect you because
Right.
they don't want to break your heart. See, that's what I think parents need to understand, that their kid may be doing things for reasons they don't understand.
Right.
So be willing to say, hey, I'm going to love you no matter what you tell me. It's like, I need to hear the truth from you. And the sooner you can get to that, the better. Because if they continue to feel ashamed and guilty, they're going to keep withdrawing and isolating. And yes, getting deeper and deeper into the addiction.
The F word is what we're talking about, people here. And awareness of fentanyl has to be raised. And that's what we're doing right now.
Yeah, I mean, and I would go on to say, again, it's more education. Like, I think, when you're explaining to your kids the harm,
Yeah.
it's not like the creepy guy in the van where it's like, okay, that's obviously, I'm going to avoid that. It's your friend who's like, oh, dude, look what I got off my brother today. It comes in a way that is not going to be perceived as dangerous to them.
Right.
And that's why they need to be educated, because they think they're having fun. They think it's cool. They got, just like we did when we were kids. When
But I'm saying
got a hold
there's
of
actually
things.
positive enforcement for this stuff. So what do we do?
Social media first came out when my daughter was about 11, and I checked her Facebook and I saw that she had friends with her teacher and her little friends in school and stuff like that. And I thought, okay, no big deal. I don't have to worry about it. Well, I didn't know she had another account that wasn't her name, and she was communicating with all kinds of people, of which I had no idea what they were talking about or whatever. These were adults. Right? So I think you really need to, as a parent, be willing to invade your kid's space a little bit, even if they're going to kick back a little bit, but do it in a way where you understand what they're being exposed to, because it's shocking what young kids are being exposed to these days.
Yeah, they sell drugs on Instagram, on the Snapchats.
Oh, yeah.
That is a very common thing. And once kids are exposed to that and realize how easy it is, and these dealers have no qualms selling to an 11-year-old.
No. So, folks, here you have an individual that really doesn't care about the lives of other people. And this is an individual that could be selling drugs to your children.
Right.
Or to you. I mean, I'm not saying this show is not just for parents. This is for everybody, because it's a dangerous world out there. I mean, we've just come out of COVID, 1 million people dead, right? That's really sad. I lost my father-in-law. I lost my father-in-law's wife. I mean, there's multiple people have been affected by COVID. I get it. It's really sad. But guess what? Those 1 million people couldn't avoid dying. The 58,000 people that died of fentanyl and the 85,000 people who died of unnecessary drug overdoses, that can be avoided, right? Isn't there a difference between avoidable death and non-avoidable death?
Yeah, absolutely.
First of all, non-avoidable death, you don't know when it's going to happen.
Right.
Right? I mean, it's just one of those unfortunate things that's very sad. Yeah. But when it's unnecessary, because then once it's unnecessary, that's when it opens up the mentally you open up, what could I have done differently? What could I have done? And then the ripple effect of that one death ripples through to destroy multiple lives.
Right.
This book here is probably the most powerful book, certainly with regards to addiction. Dan, I want to just say that this is 26 years of work, and Angie, a lot of your input is in this book too, and you guys really have done something I think massively important for me.
Thank you. And just so you know, I wrote it in a very direct, straightforward manner, and I wrote it for the average everyday person who knows nothing about the addiction treatment
even I
industry.
understood it, right? I always say, if I can get it, anybody can, right?
Yeah.
But folks, we've got a few take-home messages right before we leave. Number one, education is hugely important. Understand fentanyl is everywhere, and be very, very careful. Number two, narco pins, or what was the nasal one?
Narcan.
Narcan, tools that everybody should have in this day and age that we are at war with fentanyl. Number three, if you realize that your life's not going in a good direction, or you have anxiety about your life, that you're not going in the right direction, get some help, please, before it's too late. My name's Sean Lumsden Cook. I lost my eldest son to fentanyl, and I dedicate this show to him, and I just want it to save another life. Please, please do something about it and ask for help.